The wind blew stronger through the streets of Baixa Aldora, piling up dry leaves on the worn-out sidewalks as the noise of construction machinery filled the air. The sense of urgency was visible on the faces of every worker, every resident who watched the fast pace of the work, and especially on Ivanna, who could hardly disguise the fatigue now etched on her features. Only 6 weeks remained until the end of the 3-month deadline, and the feeling that time was slipping through her fingers was constant. However, small signs of progress began to appear. Some of the restored houses now stood out among the old structures, bringing a sense of renewal that inspired the residents. Smiles returned to many faces, and Ivanna felt that, even though they were small victories, they meant much more than just buildings. Donna Lourdes, now more active than ever in community meetings, had become a sort of spokesperson for the residents' desires, and her words of encouragement to Ivanna were the fuel that kept her going. Even on the toughest nights, when she could barely keep her eyes open while reviewing the project's final adjustments, the older woman's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that every effort was worth it. But as the community's confidence grew, a new problem emerged, threatening the project's stability. On a gloomy afternoon, while Ivanna and Hector discussed the final changes to one of the neighborhood's plazas, one of ArqVision's assistants entered the makeshift office at the construction site, visibly worried. "Ivanna, Mr. Hector, we have a problem," he said, hesitating before handing a folder of documents to Hector. His tone was serious, and Ivanna felt her heart tighten. Hector flipped through the papers quickly, his expression becoming graver with each page he read. When he finished, he looked at Ivanna, his expression darker than she had ever seen. "ArqVision is concerned about a new investment offer coming from outside," he said, tossing the papers onto the table. "A foreign group is offering a proposal for the complete revitalization of another part of Velmor, promising much faster returns. They're considering diverting part of our budget to this new opportunity. If that happens, we'll lose the funding we need to finish what we started here." Hector's words hit Ivanna like a blow. She grabbed the papers and quickly scanned the clauses, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. The offer from the foreign group was aggressive and clearly aimed at directly competing with the project they were developing in Baixa Aldora. "But they can't just abandon a project that's already underway," Ivanna said, her voice shaking with frustration. "We have a commitment to the residents. That would be a complete betrayal." "Investors don't care about promises, Ivanna," Hector replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "They care about numbers, about profitability. And right now, we're losing that battle." Silence settled between them, each absorbing the gravity of what this meant. Ivanna felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She knew she couldn't show weakness at that moment, not when everything she had fought for was at stake. Seeing the desperation on Ivanna's face, Hector did something he hadn't expected himself to do. He extended his hand in a gesture of alliance. "I know this isn't how you envision things, and that I'm part of the problem," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But right now, we're in this together. I don't want to lose what we've built either. If we're going to face this new threat, we'll need a new strategy. And I'll need your help." Ivanna looked at Hector's outstretched hand and hesitated for a moment. All the distrust and anger she felt toward him were still there, but there was something else now, a recognition that, despite their differences, they both wanted to save what they had started. And in that moment, she realized that perhaps there was a chance to find common ground. She took a deep breath and shook Hector's hand, feeling a strange mix of relief and tension. It was a truce, not a full alliance, but it was a step that needed to be taken. "Oh, Hector," Ivanna said, her voice firm but without its previous harshness. "We'll fight for this together. But I won't give up on my vision for Baixa Aldora. We need to show the investors that what we're doing here has value, not just financial, but social." In the days that followed, Ivanna and Hector began working more closely together than ever before. They reviewed the project's finances, adjusted the execution plans to buy more time, and prepared a presentation for ArqVision and the investors, highlighting the initial results already visible in Baixa Aldora. Ivanna insisted on including testimonials from the residents, while Hector focused on the numbers, showing how the revitalized spaces were attracting new visitors and small local businesses. Their collaboration, however, wasn't free of conflicts. Hector still grew frustrated with Ivanna's insistence on preserving every detail, and she was exasperated by his impatience and focus on the financial aspects alone. But somehow, the dynamic between them began to balance out, like two sides of the same coin, each filling in the gaps the other left. Meanwhile, news about the potential withdrawal of investment reached the ears of Baixa Aldora's residents, causing a wave of concern. Dona Lourdes organized a community meeting to discuss the situation, and Ivanna and Hector were invited to attend. The small square where they gathered was filled with anxious, worried faces, but also with voices ready to fight. "We can't lose this now, Ivanna," said one of the residents, a young father who had reopened his small business thanks to the revitalization. "You've given us hope for a better future for our children. If they pull out of the project, what will happen to us?" Ivanna looked at each face present and felt the weight of responsibility grow even heavier on her shoulders. She knew that the decision wasn't hers alone, but also depended on how they would face this new challenge as a community. And for the first time, she sensed that Hector was by her side, not just as an opponent but as someone who was beginning to understand what was truly at stake. "I promise you that we will not give up without a fight," Ivanna said, her voice firm and her eyes shining with determination. "You are the soul of this project, and together we will show that Baixa Aldora deserves to be heard. We have a new presentation for ArqVision, and I will do everything I can to make them see the value of what we are building here." Hector remained silent beside her, but as he looked at the faces of the residents, he felt something shift inside him. He realized that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't just defending numbers and spreadsheets but also a cause that was beginning to resonate within him, even though he didn't quite know how to process this feeling. The meeting ended with a mixture of apprehension and hope, and Ivanna and Hector returned to the office to prepare the final details before presenting their case to ArqVision. They knew that the project's future was at stake and that any misstep could mean the end of everything they had fought for. The day of the presentation finally arrived, and Ivanna and Hector stood side by side, ready to face the investors once more. As they looked out over the city of Velmor from the top of ArqVision's building, each lost in their own thoughts, they both knew they were about to face the most pivotal moment of their lives. The fates of Ivanna, Hector, and all of Baixa Aldora were on the line, and the struggle they had waged, both together and apart, was about to reach its climax. The sun rose timidly over Velmor, its rays reflecting off the windows of the tall buildings, casting a golden glow that tried to dispel the shadows of recent days. Inside the ArqVision building at the heart of the city, Ivanna and Hector prepared to face one of the most decisive moments of their lives. The presentation they were about to give wasn't just about numbers and progress, it was about the future of Baixa Aldora and about their own journeys as professionals and as people. Ivanna took a deep breath as she arranged the final sketchboards on the conference room table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was focused. She had reviewed every detail of the presentation since the night before, ensuring that the charts showed the positive impact that the renovations were already having on the neighborhood. But more than that, she included images and testimonials from the residents, emphasizing that this project was not just about construction, but about rebuilding lives. Hector watched her from a corner of the room, his expression guarded, but his gaze carried something beyond the usual coldness. He, too, was aware of the importance of this moment, and as much as he hated to admit it, he was beginning to sense that perhaps Ivanna had been right about something he had always ignored: the value of the stories these buildings held, the human impact he had always overlooked in favor of profit. "Are we ready?" Hector asked, adjusting the collar of his suit. Ivanna noticed that, for the first time, he seemed as tense as she was. "I'm not sure anyone's ever truly ready for something like this," Ivanna replied with a nervous smile. "But I'm confident we've done our best. Now, all we can do is convince these people that it's worth continuing." The ArqVision executives entered the room, carrying folders and documents, their expressions neutral and calculating. Ivanna and Hector stood before the table, and she felt her heart race. This was the moment to put everything on the line. With a formal nod, the group leader indicated that they could begin. Ivanna started the presentation, and images of Baixa Aldora before and after the renovations filled the screen. She spoke about each intervention, explaining how the restorations had respected the local history while introducing modern improvements. She showed images of revitalized homes, plazas coming to life with new community activities, and finally, testimonials from residents, expressing their gratitude for the chance to see their neighborhood flourish again. Hector followed, highlighting the numbers, the medium and long-term return forecasts, and the strategies they had implemented to optimize costs. He spoke with authority, but there was a shift in his tone. It wasn't just a cold presentation of data, but a genuine attempt to show that the project still had potential. He knew that Ivanna needed him to be strong there, and for the first time, he realized that he wanted to live up to the trust she had placed in him. The silence in the conference room felt almost tangible as the executives reviewed the information presented. Ivanna and Hector exchanged a quick glance, sharing a moment of tension and expectation. The ArqVision leader flipped through the reports calmly, while the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. "Ms. Ivanna, Mr. Hector," the executive began, folding his hands on the table. "We have followed the effort both of you have put into this project. We recognize the improvements that have already been made in Baixa Aldora, and it is clear that there is a positive impact on the local community. However, the issue here is financial viability. We need to be sure that this project will deliver the returns we expect." Ivanna felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that this was the crucial moment, and that every word from this point on could determine the future of everything they had built. "I understand your concerns," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "And I know that financial returns are crucial. But I ask you to look at the numbers we've presented and at what we've been able to achieve in such a short time. We are building something that is not just concrete and bricks. It's the chance to transform Velmor into a city that respects its past while moving toward the future. That, in the long run, is what will bring true value." Hector watched Ivanna as she spoke and felt a weight in his chest. There was something in her conviction that disarmed him, that made him question why he had never found that passion in his own projects. When the executives turned their attention to him, he realized that he needed to back her words, even if part of him still feared the consequences. "We are committed to ensuring that this project achieves the expected results," Hector said, his voice lower but resolute. "And I believe that with ArqVision's continued support, we can make Baixa Aldora a model of urban revitalization, something that will be seen as a landmark in Velmor. Give us this chance and we won't let you down." The ArqVision leader held his expression unreadable for a few more seconds before he stood up and extended his hand. Ivanna felt her heart stop for a moment as he finally spoke. "Very well, Ms. Ivanna, Mr. Hector. We are willing to continue the funding, but under one condition." He looked directly at Ivanna. "We need to see a significant increase in returns over the next 6 months. If you can attract new local investors, it will demonstrate that the project can be self-sustaining. Otherwise, we will be forced to reconsider our involvement." Ivanna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was a challenge, no doubt, but it was also a chance, an opportunity to keep fighting for what she believed in. She shook the executive's hand firmly, trying to maintain her composure, though unable to hide a slight smile of relief. "Thank you for believing in Baixa Aldora's potential," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We will do everything we can to exceed expectations." Hector also shook the executive's hand, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew the challenge wouldn't be easy, but somehow, he felt a new energy around him, an energy that came from Ivanna's determination and was beginning to seep into his own way of thinking. As they left the ArqVision building, the cold wind of Velmor greeted them, but this time there was something different between them. Ivanna and Hector walked side by side through the streets, not exchanging many words but sharing the sense that they had achieved something significant. It was a small victory, but for Ivanna, It meant that her dreams still had a chance to come true. "You did well in there, Ivanna," Hector said, breaking the silence. "I know we still have a lot of work ahead, but I really hope we can make it." Ivanna looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words, and smiled genuinely for the first time in a long while. "I hope so too, Hector," she replied with a slight nod. "Thank you for believing, even though it was hard at the start." As they made their way back to Baixa Aldora, the future still seemed uncertain, but there was a new spark of hope between them. Ivanna knew that the road ahead would be difficult and that the challenges were far from over, but she felt she had found an unexpected ally in the person who had once been her greatest obstacle. And Hector, though unsure of what it meant for him, began to realize that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, he was fighting for something greater than just numbers. The lights of Velmor twinkled in the distance as they walked through the streets, carrying with them the promise of a new beginning. And deep in their hearts, they knew that this was just another step in a journey that still held many surprises. The days in Velmor seemed to have taken on a new rhythm, a pulse that mixed anxiety and hope in the streets of Baixa Aldora. With the 6-month deadline set by ArqVision, Ivanna and Hector found themselves facing a new phase of the project, a phase where attracting new local investors was crucial. They could no longer rely solely on ArqVision's funds and needed to show that the revitalized neighborhood could be self-sustaining and attract the attention of local businesspeople. Ivanna knew this was the toughest part of her journey so far. Convincing local investors meant not only presenting numbers and plans but also changing the perception that Velmor had of Baixa Aldora. For many of the city's businesspeople, the neighborhood was still seen as a rundown area, unworthy of attention. Ivanna needed to show that Baixa Aldora had changed, that there was potential there that they had yet to see. Hector, on the other hand, began to feel the weight of his own doubts. He had spent most of his career focused on numbers and results, and now he found himself in a scenario where the emotion and history of a place seemed as important as profits. Even so, he was determined to use his skills to help Ivanna reach her goals, even if he didn't fully understand what drove him to do so. The first attempt to attract new investors began with a series of meetings organized in the neighborhood itself. Ivanna and Hector decided to invite local small business owners to learn about the project, offering a tour of the revitalized areas and presenting their vision of a future where Baixa Aldora could become a hub of culture and innovation. Dona Lourdes was one of the first to help promote these meetings, using her network of contacts among Velmor's longtime residents to spread the word. And on a sunny afternoon, the neighborhood streets began to welcome visitors who hadn't set foot there in years. Business owners, merchants, some curious and others skeptical, but all interested in understanding what had changed in Baixa Aldora. "Welcome to our neighborhood," Ivanna said at the beginning of the tour, her voice filled with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in a long time. "What you'll see here is not just a series of renovations, but proof that Velmor still has room for its own history. Baixa Aldora is not just a past that fades away, but a place where the past and future meet." Hector watched closely, trying to read the visitors' reactions as Ivanna guided them through the revitalized streets, pointing out the restored facades, the plazas that now hosted small cultural events organized by the residents, and the community centers that had been reopened. He knew this moment was crucial, that any misstep could mean the loss of an opportunity that wouldn't come again. Some of the business owners seemed intrigued. Ivanna's passion for every detail of the neighborhood seemed to break down some of their initial resistance. Hector, with his technical knowledge and pragmatic outlook, complemented her explanations with information about the neighborhood's growth potential and the advantages of investing there. "If we've managed to revitalize half of what we planned with the resources we've had so far," Hector said during one of the presentations, "imagine what we could achieve with all of your support. Financial returns are a matter of time, but the social and cultural return is already happening, and you have the chance to be a part of it." Hector's words sounded strange even to himself, as if he were speaking about a project that now meant something deeper than just profit. And for the first time, he realized that, in some way, he believed in what he was saying. Even though he still tried to maintain a certain emotional distance, he couldn't deny that something within him had changed. But not all of the business owners were easily convinced. A group, led by a traditionalist merchant named Walter, directly questioned the project's viability. "This all sounds very nice in theory," Walter said, arms crossed and a skeptical look directed at Ivanna. "But in the end, what we want to see are numbers, not dreams. People here might be happy, but how does that translate into profit? How much longer do we have to wait to see some real return?" Ivanna felt the weight of his words, and for a moment, she feared that her reasoning wouldn't be enough. But before she could respond, Hector intervened, speaking with more firmness than usual. "I understand your concern, Walter," he said, meeting the businessman's gaze. "But we're here to show that Baixa Aldora isn't a risk, it's an opportunity. The first reopened businesses have already shown an increase in foot traffic and customers. The neighborhood is attracting people who wouldn't have considered coming here before. It's only a matter of time before the initial investments turn into real gains. But for that to happen, we need those who can see beyond what has been." Walter kept his skeptical expression, but Hector's words, combined with Ivanna's presentation, managed to plant a seed of doubt in his resistance. He didn't give an immediate answer, but he promised to consider the proposal more carefully. Other business owners, more open to change, began to show interest in participating in some smaller initiatives in the neighborhood, like cultural events and the revitalization of commercial spaces. In the days that followed, Ivanna and Hector worked even more closely, organizing events that highlighted Baixa Aldora's culture and demonstrating that the neighborhood could be a bridge between Velmor's past and future. Ivanna coordinated every detail, involving the residents at every stage of the process, while Hector used his network of contacts to ensure that each event had the presence of influential figures from the city. However, the challenges kept coming. ArqVision continued to push for more visible results, and Walter, while promising support, insisted on pushing the community toward the idea that speeding up the modernization of some areas was necessary to ensure quicker returns. Ivanna often found herself acting as a mediator, trying to balance the expectations of the business owners with the needs of the residents. One night, after another tense meeting with local investors, Ivanna and Hector found themselves alone in the newly renovated community center. They looked out over the space that, just a few months ago, had been in ruins but now was a place where children played during the day and adults gathered for evening classes in crafts and music. "Do you think we're going to make it?" Ivanna asked, her voice sounding more vulnerable than she would have liked. "I feel like we're so close, but still so far from achieving what we need." Hector looked at Ivanna, and for a moment he saw in her the same determination he had once dismissed. But now there was something more. He recognized in her a courage that he had lost over the years, a courage to fight for something without knowing if there would be an immediate reward, without the guarantee that the struggle would yield any returns. "I don't know if we'll make it, Ivanna," he said, his voice low but sincere. "But I know I'm willing to try until the end. And that's more than I could have said before." Ivanna smiled slightly, feeling that for the first time, they were truly on the same side. There were still many challenges ahead, but in that moment, as they looked at the fruit of their efforts, there was also a hope that could not be ignored. As night wrapped Velmor in its darkness, they both knew that the coming months would be decisive. The fight to attract new investors was still ongoing, and the financial and emotional challenges continued to test them both. But there was something new in their hearts, a spark of faith in what they could achieve together, even if the path ahead remained uncertain. The months of hard work were starting to show visible results in Baixa Aldora, and the feeling that something special was happening in the neighborhood spread through the streets. The community center, the restored houses, and the small businesses reopening their doors had transformed the neighborhood into a more welcoming and vibrant place. The new cultural events attracted visitors from other parts of Velmor, and for the first time in a long while, there was an atmosphere of hope in the air. Ivanna and Hector were pleased with the progress, though the weight of the final deadline still loomed over their minds. Meetings with local business owners began to yield some positive results. Small investors committed to financial support to help finish the work, especially for projects focused on cultural and historical preservation in Baixa Aldora. It was a modest but important victory, bringing a breath of optimism to both. But as always, the path would not be easy. ArqVision, maintaining its pragmatic perspective, continued to closely monitor every step of the project, demanding faster and more visible financial returns. Pressure came from all sides, and Ivanna knew that despite the support of small investors, they still needed a major local investor who could ensure the project's long-term sustainability. It was in this context that Walter reappeared with a new proposal. After weeks of uncertainty, the traditionalist businessman approached Ivanna and Hector during one of the project's progress meetings, bringing an offer that, in his view, was a solution to the financial challenges they still faced. "Listen, I have a proposal that could benefit all of us," Walter said, adjusting his glasses and looking directly at Ivanna and Hector. "I've decided to make a significant investment in the project, but it comes with some conditions. We need to speed up the modernization of some areas and allow part of the space to be used for more profitable commercial ventures. With that, we can ensure quicker returns, attracting even more investors." Ivanna felt her heart tighten at Walter's words. She knew his proposal could solve part of their financial problems and provide the safety net that ArqVision was demanding. But the price was high. It meant giving up part of the essence of the project, allowing modernization to take the place of some of the historical preservation efforts she had fought so hard to protect. Hector knew this meant a difficult dilemma too. He looked at Ivanna, waiting for her reaction, and saw the hesitation and pain in her eyes. The old Hector, who had always chosen pragmatism, knew he should accept Walter's offer immediately, but since becoming more deeply involved in the project, he had begun to question his own certainties. "Ivanna, we need to think this through carefully," Hector said, trying to keep his tone neutral but knowing that the decision would not be easy. "This could give us the stability we need. I know it's not what we planned, but maybe it's the price to pay to keep Baixa Aldora alive." Ivanna bit her lip, feeling a knot in her throat. She looked at Walter, who maintained a calculating expression, and then at Hector, who, for the first time, seemed genuinely torn between his pragmatic side and the new perspective he was beginning to develop. "I know it's a tempting offer, Walter," Ivanna began, her voice tense. "And I know that the money you're offering could give us some breathing room. But I can't just give up on what we promised the people of Baixa Aldora. I can't turn this place into just another commercial hub of Velmor. They believe in us because we showed them that there's another way to grow, a way that respects their history." Walter let out a sigh, clearly impatient, and turned to Hector, expecting him to take a more practical stance. "Mr. Hector, what do you think about this? You know we have to consider what's best for everyone, not just ideals. I'm offering a real opportunity to keep this project afloat." Hector felt the weight of Walter's gaze and, at the same time, Ivanna's silent expectation. He knew that this was a defining moment, not just for the future of Baixa Aldora but for himself. Fighting for something beyond numbers, something that transcended reports and profit projections, was a feeling he was starting to understand better, but it still left him uneasy. After a long silence, he finally spoke, in a tone that surprised everyone, including himself. "Walter, I understand your proposal and appreciate your interest," Hector said, his eyes on the documents on the table. "But I think Ivanna is right. Accepting these terms would betray everything we've built so far. We can find other ways to secure the returns we need. I know it's not the answer you were hoping for, but I'd rather bet on this." Walter's reaction was immediate. His face twisted into a look of disapproval, and he gathered up the documents with a sharp motion. "You're making a big mistake, and when you realize it, it might be too late," he said before leaving the room, leaving behind a heavy silence. Ivanna felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She knew that the decision to reject Walter's proposal wouldn't be easy to explain to the investors at ArqVision, and it would increase the pressure on them even more. But she also felt a quiet gratitude toward Hector, who, against all expectations, had supported her vision. "Thank you, Hector," Ivanna said, her voice trembling. "I know it wasn't easy for you. And I promise I'll find another way to make this work. I won't let the project fail." Hector shrugged, trying to downplay the seriousness of the moment, but there was a softness in his gaze that Ivanna hadn't seen before. "I just hope you're right, Ivanna," he replied with a faint smile. "Because this time, I'm putting all my chips on you." In the days that followed the meeting, the impact of the decision began to take shape. ArqVision expressed frustration at the refusal of a potential major investor like Velmor, and the pressure for financial results intensified. Tensions began to seep into meetings between Ivanna and Hector, who now needed to find new ways to secure funding and accelerate the project's impact. Despite the challenges, Ivanna refused to give up. She intensified her outreach to the small business owners who had shown interest, organizing new community events and seeking creative ways to attract visitors to the neighborhood. And although the path was uncertain, she felt that she was finally fighting for something she believed in, with an unexpected ally by her side. As the lights of Velmor gleamed on cold nights, Ivanna and Hector continued working side by side, facing the doubts and fears that they might be moving against the current. But something kept pushing them forward. A sense that, even if the world around them didn't understand, they were doing what they believed was right. Meanwhile, Velmor watched from afar, determined to prove that their gamble would be in vain. He wasn't willing to let his ideas be dismissed without consequences, and in the shadows, he began to plan ways to further pressure the project's continuation. Baixa Aldora hadn't won its battle yet, and Ivanna and Hector were about to discover that their greatest challenges were still ahead. The cold winter winds began to blow through Velmor, and the city prepared for the arrival of a season that always brought a sense of melancholy. But for Ivanna and Hector, the biggest storm didn't come from the weather. It came from the mounting pressures on the Baixa Aldora revitalization project. The decision to reject Velmor's offer had been an act of courage but also a risky bet, and now they had to face the consequences of their choice. ArqVision, initially patient, began to show signs of impatience. Meetings that had once focused on adjustments and progress updates turned into sessions of direct demands. The executives wanted answers about expected returns, new partnerships, and how Ivanna and Hector planned to secure the project's financial sustainability without the backing of a major investor like Velmor. "We need to see a concrete plan, Ivanna," one of the executives said during a video conference, his stern expression reflected on the screen. "If there's no progress in the coming weeks, we will be forced to reconsider our financial support. We can't wait for promises anymore. We need results." Ivanna felt her chest tighten, but she tried to maintain a firm stance. She knew she couldn't show weakness at that moment. She assured ArqVision that she was working on new strategies, that the events in the neighborhood were starting to attract more attention, and that they would soon be able to demonstrate the impact of the investments on the lives of the residents and local tourism. But internally, she knew that the coming weeks would be critical and that the success or failure of the project depended on every move she and Hector made. Meanwhile, Velmor hadn't given up on his intention to destabilize the project. Frustrated by being turned down, he began using his influence among Velmor's businesspeople and political figures to sow doubts about the viability of Baixa Aldora's revitalization. He organized private meetings where he openly criticized Ivanna's management and questioned Hector's ability to keep the project financially viable. Velmor saw the downfall of the project as an opportunity to reaffirm his vision of total modernization, and he would spare no effort to show that he had been underestimated. Soon, the rumors began to reach the ears of the residents, and Ivanna found herself facing a new kind of resistance. Some families that had previously supported her began to question whether she could truly deliver on the promises she had made. Ivanna realized that the sense of hope she had built was fading, replaced by a feeling of uncertainty and fear about the future. "Ivanna, I heard that you might lose ArqVision's support," said one of the local shopkeepers as he arranged the goods in his small store. "I want to believe in you, but I've seen so many promises fail around here. I don't know if I can afford to take another risk." Those words cut Ivanna like a knife. She tried to reassure the residents that she was doing everything she could, but the doubt in their eyes was hard to ignore. She knew that for many, what was at stake wasn't just the future of Baixa Aldora but the hope that one day they might see their own city treated with respect and dignity. On a cold night, Ivanna and Hector met in the makeshift office at the construction site, trying to find solutions to the dilemma they faced. Papers with graphs, sketches, and proposals were spread across the table, but none of them seemed to hold an immediate answer to the bigger problem: how to maintain ArqVision's support while resisting the pressure from Velmor and local investors. ArqVision is putting more pressure on us every day, and the rumors Velmor is spreading aren't helping at all, Hector said, rubbing his face with his hands, visibly exhausted. We need a big event, something that shows this project has immediate potential for impact. Something that draws attention and brings new visitors to the neighborhood before the funding dries up completely. Ivanna looked at him, feeling the weight of responsibility in every word. She knew Hector was trying to help her, that they were now truly working together. But she also knew it wasn't easy for him, someone who had spent years making pragmatic and quick decisions, to adapt to a process that was so emotionally charged. I know we need to be quick, Hector, but we can't just put together something superficial, Ivanna replied, her voice tense but determined. Baixa Aldora deserves something that really shows who we are, that shows how history and modernity can coexist. If we just throw another event, it won't be enough. We need people to feel what we're doing here. Hector nodded slowly, but there was clear concern in his eyes. So, what do you suggest? We need something grand, something that not only catches the investors' attention but also shows the residents that we're still committed to them. Ivanna fell silent for a moment, looking out the window at the streets of the neighborhood she loved so much. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalks, and she thought of all the faces she had encountered over the months, every smile, every expression of hope, every doubtful look. Then an idea came to her, something that could be risky but might be exactly what they needed. What if we organize a big community festival in Baixa Aldora? She suggested, her eyes bright with the idea that was beginning to take shape. An event that involves all the residents, that brings back old traditions but also showcases the new face of the neighborhood. We could invite artists, musicians, artisans. Make it a festival that shows Velmor the best of Baixa Aldora, that proves revitalization is not just about buildings but about people. Hector regarded her with a mix of surprise and doubt. He knew that such an event could attract the attention they needed, but he also knew it would be a huge risk. Organizing something of that scale would require resources, time, and coordination that they barely had. And if it failed, it could be the final blow to the project. It's a big risk, Ivanna, he said, his voice filled with caution. But maybe it's what we need. If it succeeds, it could bring a new perspective to what we're doing here. And honestly, I don't see any other option right now. Ivanna nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination welling up inside her. She knew it was a risky bet, but she also knew that it might be the only way to prove that Baixa Aldora still had a future. And for the first time, she felt that Hector was truly on her side, ready to risk everything along with her. Then let's do it, Hector, she said with a defiant smile. Let's show everyone what Baixa Aldora can be. And if this is our last chance, let it be the best one we've ever had. In the days that followed, Ivanna and Hector began to mobilize the community, seeking support from small business owners, local artists, and volunteers who wanted to help turn the festival into a memorable event. Donna Lourdes, with her tireless energy, became one of the main organizers, helping coordinate activities and ensuring that everyone felt like a part of what was happening. As the festival took shape, Velmor watched from a distance, suspicious that Ivanna and Hector's gamble was more than just a simple event. He knew that if they managed to turn the festival into a success, his influence over the investors would diminish, and he would lose the chance to impose his vision of total modernization. Determined to prevent this, he began seeking ways to undermine the event, spreading rumors that the festival was nothing more than a desperate attempt to save a doomed project. The tension heightened as the festival approached, but at the same time, There was a spark of hope among the residents, a sense that perhaps this event could be the moment when Baixa Aldora would show its true worth. And for Ivanna and Hector, it was the last chance to prove that, despite all the challenges, the neighborhood's revitalization was a cause worth fighting for. The city of Velmor seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the festival finally began. And as the cold night approached, Ivanna and Hector knew they were about to face the most difficult test of their lives. The day of the community festival dawned with a clear sky and a timid sun, but it was already a good omen for Ivanna and the residents of Baixa Aldora. The central square, which had been transformed into a community gathering spot, was filled with colorful stalls, decorated with streamers and elements that evoked the neighborhood's traditions. Children ran along the sidewalks, while adults set up the last structures and organized the products that would be displayed throughout the event. Ivanna stood in the center of the activity, checking every detail and helping wherever she could. The exhaustion of the past few days was still visible on her face, but there was a flame of hope in her eyes. She knew that this festival was more than just a celebration. It was a chance to show Velmor that Baixa Aldora was a living place, full of history and potential. "Everything seems to be going well so far," Hector said, approaching Ivanna with a faint smile. He wore a coat that seemed out of place in the simple setting of the square, but there was a less formal air about him. "But we still need to make sure the visitors come. If we can't draw in the crowd, all this preparation could be for nothing." Ivanna nodded, acknowledging Hector's concern. They had mobilized the entire community to promote the event, spreading invitations throughout other neighborhoods in Velmor, especially those that knew little about Baixa Aldora. Donna Lured, always enthusiastic, had organized a group of residents to personally invite families and business owners. "I know, Hector, but I feel like something good will happen today," Ivanna replied, her voice filled with a confidence she tried to keep alive. "People need to see what we've built here. And even if it's a risk, I think it's worth it." As morning turned into afternoon, the streets of Baixa Aldora began to receive the first visitors. Some were curious onlookers who had never set foot in the neighborhood, while others were former residents returning to see the place where they had grown up. The craft stalls, traditional food stands, and local music performances began to come to life, and the square soon filled with laughter and lively conversations. Ivanna watched the scene with a mix of relief and emotion. Seeing people reconnecting with the roots of Baixa Aldora was exactly what she had dreamed of. Every smile, every compliment about the work done, was a reminder that all the effort had been worth it. Hector, by her side, couldn't help but notice the transformation taking over the once neglected streets. "I think we did it, Ivanna," he said, looking at the growing crowd. "Maybe this festival is what we needed to turn things around." But as Ivanna and Hector allowed themselves to believe that the worst was behind them, a shadow moved among the visitors. Walter, the businessman whose proposal had been rejected, was also present, but not as a guest. He moved through the stalls and among groups of visitors, murmuring his criticisms and spreading doubts about what was happening. "Don't be fooled, folks," he told a group of Velmor merchants who had come to see the festival. "This is nice to look at, but it's an illusion. They don't have the funds to sustain this project, and when the investments dry up, Baixa Aldora will go back to being what it always was. A place without a future." Walter's words were like poison, and they quickly began to have an effect on some of the visitors. Some business people, who had come to the festival with the intention of investing, started to pull back, whispering among themselves that perhaps Walter was right. The perception that the festival was just a facade began to spread, and Ivanna and Hector realized that something was wrong when they saw small groups starting to leave the event earlier than expected. "Something's not right," Hector said, his expression serious as he watched the visitors dispersing. "Walter must be behind this. He would never let our gamble succeed. We need to act before it's too late." Ivanna felt a wave of desperation tighten her chest. She had put everything into this festival, all her hopes and the trust of the community. She couldn't let Walter destroy everything with his insinuations. She thought quickly and decided they needed to change the narrative before the rumors took over. "Hector, I'm going to speak to the crowd," Ivanna said, her voice firm even though her heart was racing. "I'm going to speak directly to everyone who came here. They need to know what we're doing, they need to hear the truth from someone who believes in this place." Hector hesitated for a moment but saw that Ivanna was determined. He knew that, in that moment, she was the best person to speak for Baixa Aldora. And, to his own surprise, he also felt that he wanted to help her face Walter and what he represented. "I'll take care of Walter," Hector said, with a determined look. "He needs to understand that this place is stronger than he thinks." As Hector moved away to confront Walter, Ivanna climbed onto a small improvised stage in the center of the square, using a microphone that the event organizers had set up for musical performances. The sound echoed through the square, and the residents, visitors, and merchants present turned their attention to her. "Thank you to everyone who came today," she began, trying to control the emotion in her voice. "I know many of you are here to see what Baixa Aldora has become, and maybe some of you have doubts about what we're trying to build. But I want you to know that what's happening here is real. Every restored house, every space we've brought back to life, is the result of a collective effort from a community that hasn't given up on its history." Ivanna's eyes filled with tears as she saw the faces of the residents who were watching her intently. She thought of everything she had been through to get there, every challenge, every criticism, every moment of doubt. And she felt that these words came from the deepest part of her heart. "I can't promise that everything will be easy," she continued, her voice now gaining strength. "But I can promise that we won't stop fighting for this place. Baixa Aldora is more than just a neighborhood, it's a piece of Velmor's history, and all of you are part of that. Believe in what you're seeing today, and believe that together we can make this grow even more." Ivanna's words resonated through the square, and something began to change in the air. The visitors, who had seemed hesitant before, began to applaud, and the residents joined them, raising their voices in support of the architect who had believed in them. Hector, watching from afar, smiled discreetly, feeling that perhaps they still had a chance. Walter, confronted by Hector and by the applause echoing through the square, realized he had lost this round. He knew that the festival might still not be enough to save the project, but seeing the unity among the residents and Ivanna's determination made him realize he had underestimated the strength of Baixa Aldora. As the sun began to set over Velmor, the square in Baixa Aldora was alive with music, laughter, and hope. And even though the challenges were far from over, Ivanna felt that, for a moment, she had proven that Baixa Aldora was much more than the ruins of a forgotten past. It was a place that still had a lot to offer, and she wasn't willing to give up on it. Hector approached Ivanna, and together they watched the lively square. He extended his hand to her, a gesture of recognition and respect. "You did a great job today, Ivanna," he said sincerely. "And whatever the next challenge, we're in this together." Ivanna shook Hector's hand, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew there was still much to be done, but for the first time, she felt that they were truly united in the same fight. Night fell over Velmor, but in Baixa Aldora, the festival lights continued to shine, casting a new kind of light over a neighborhood that had been forgotten for so long. And as the music and laughter echoed through the streets, Ivanna and Hector knew that in that moment, they had found a new chance to show the world that Baixa Aldora was not just surviving, it was being reborn. The first rays of sunlight after the festival brought a sense of renewal to Baixa Aldora. The square, which had been the center of celebrations the night before, was now covered with the remnants of an event that, for a brief moment, had revealed the true spirit of the neighborhood. Ivanna walked through the streets, watching the stalls being taken down and the smiles still present on the faces of the residents who were helping with the cleanup. There was a feeling of victory in the air, though it was a quiet one. "It was a memorable day, Ivanna," said Dona Lourdes, approaching with a tired but happy smile. "I haven't seen this many people around here in years. You gave us something we hadn't had in a long time, hope." Ivanna returned the smile, feeling a comforting warmth in her chest. For a moment, the weight of all her worries seemed lighter, and she could breathe a little easier, knowing she had fulfilled her promise, even if only for a moment. But reality quickly set in. Hector arrived at the construction site with a serious expression, bringing the first news about the festival's reception among the investors and at ArqVision. "Ivanna, we need to talk," he said, indicating that she should join him for a private meeting. As they entered the makeshift office, he handed her an envelope with the ArqVision logo on the front. Ivanna opened the envelope with her heart racing. Inside, there was a detailed report on ArqVision's evaluation of the festival. There were compliments on the effort to engage the community, recognition of the positive impact on the perception of Baixa Aldora, but, as always, the cold words of the document also carried a clear demand. The festival was a success in terms of engagement, but we need concrete guarantees of financial returns in the coming weeks. Continued funding will depend on immediate results. "They're still not convinced," Hector said with a sigh, leaning against the table. "They liked what they saw, but they want more. They need something that shows the investments will continue to pay off. It means we're still walking a tightrope." Ivanna felt the relief from the festival quickly replaced by tension. She knew that the event had been an important step, but, as always, the reality of the numbers overshadowed the power of feelings. They needed new investments quickly, or all the effort could be in vain. "We need a plan, Hector," Ivanna said, trying to stay calm. "I can't let the festival be just a passing event. We need to turn this moment into something lasting." Hector nodded, and the two spent the next few hours in a tense meeting, discussing possible strategies to capitalize on the festival's success. They identified some of the companies that had shown interest during the event and started planning follow-up meetings to secure new financial commitments. But they knew that time was against them, and that convincing these businesspeople to invest in the neighborhood would be a challenge. While Ivanna and Hector struggled to find solutions, Walter had not given up on his offensive. He met with other business owners and influential figures in Velmor, reinforcing the idea that Baixa Aldora wouldn't be able to sustain the growth it promised. Walter knew there was still a chance to impose his vision of modernization on the neighborhood, and he was willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. In one of these meetings, Walter secured important support from a group of local investors, who committed to funding an advertising campaign to promote the idea of a modern Velmor, a movement that favored replacing old structures in neighborhoods like Baixa Aldora with luxury commercial developments. The campaign aimed to further undermine the image of Ivanna and Hector's project, portraying it as a naive attempt to preserve what, according to them, no longer held value. The ads began to appear on the streets of Velmor, on billboards, local radio stations, and social media, emphasizing the need to move forward and modernize the city's old areas. For Ivanna, it felt like a direct blow in the midst of her efforts to solidify the support she had gained from the festival. She watched, disheartened, as some businesspeople who had shown interest in the project now hesitated, influenced by Walter's rhetoric. "He's playing dirty, Hector," Ivanna said, her voice filled with frustration as they looked at one of the ads in the street, suggesting that preserving old neighborhoods was holding Velmor back. "How are we supposed to compete with this? He has money, influence, and he's not afraid to use both to manipulate public opinion." Hector looked at the ad, then at Ivanna, feeling the pressure mount even further. He knew that a lot was at stake, and that Walter was willing to take the battle to its final consequences. But he also knew that Ivanna wasn't someone who would give up easily, and he himself felt a growing desire to prove they were on the right side. "Maybe we can't compete with Walter's money, Ivanna," he said thoughtfully. "But we have something he doesn't: the community. The festival showed that there are people who still believe in what we're doing. If we can rally them again, maybe we can turn this narrative in our favor." Ivanna thought for a moment, and the idea began to take shape in her mind. She knew that the residents of Baixa Aldora were the key to the project's survival, and that if they could make their voices heard, they could counter the image Walter was trying to create. They decided to organize a series of smaller community events, focused on showcasing the neighborhood's importance to Velmor's culture, with the residents themselves sharing their stories and highlighting the positive impact of the revitalization. The following weeks were a true test of endurance for Ivanna and Hector. They worked tirelessly to bring the residents together, coordinate the events, and ensure that every action received enough visibility to counter Walter's campaigns. Ivanna spent sleepless nights reviewing every detail, while Hector used his network of contacts to make sure the local media covered the events fairly. Donna Lourdes and other residents became the spokespeople for the movement, appearing in interviews and videos shared on social media, explaining how the revitalization had given new life to the neighborhood and renewed their hopes. Gradually, the community's stories began to gain attention, and some of Velmor's influential voices started to question the intentions behind Walter's campaign. Hector, who had once been a face of cold and calculated logic, now found himself defending something that had soul and purpose. In an interview for a local radio station, he spoke about how the work in Baixa Aldora had changed his perspective, and how he believed the neighborhood was an example that Velmor didn't need to forget its past to build a prosperous future. "I've learned that preserving a place's history isn't a weakness, it's a way to strengthen a community," Hector said, feeling strangely comfortable admitting something so personal in public. Baixa Aldora is more than just an old neighborhood. It's a symbol that Velmor can grow without leaving its roots behind. Hector's words even surprised Ivanna, who listened to the interview and realized that, somehow, the man she had seen as an enemy at the beginning of their journey now seemed to understand the essence of what she had always believed. But she knew that even with this change, the challenge ahead was immense. The struggle between Ivanna, Hector, and Walter had reached a critical point, with each side trying to prove that their vision for Velmor was the best. While the community events brought more support to the project, Walter's modernization campaign still had the financial resources and influence that could turn the tide. Ivanna and Hector needed a final blow, something that could decisively tip the balance in their favor before ArqVision's patience ran out and before the residents lost hope. And deep down, both knew they couldn't do this alone. They would need the full strength of the Baixa Aldora community to show the world that Velmor's future could be built differently. The city of Velmor awaited the next chapters of this dispute with anticipation, as Ivanna and Hector prepared to face what could be the last great challenge before determining Baixa Aldora's fate. The day of the final presentation to ArqVision dawned with an overcast sky, heavy clouds threatening rain over Velmor. For Ivanna and Hector, it was the decisive moment, their last chance to prove that the Baixa Aldora revitalization project was more than just a romantic idea. It was a reality that could benefit the entire city. The presentation was scheduled at Baixa Aldora's community center, a symbol of the revitalization efforts and a place that, for Ivanna, represented the heart of the neighborhood. ArqVision, which had previously held all meetings in its luxurious offices, accepted the invitation to conduct the presentation in a place that was part of the project. It was a sign that something had shifted, but it was still unclear whether it would be enough to secure the project's future. Outside the community center, a crowd of residents and supporters waited anxiously for the outcome, as the cold wind fluttered the flags left over from the festival. Donna Lourdes, with her wise gaze, watched the gathering alongside other community leaders, holding on to the hope that everything they had fought for wouldn't be in vain. "Will they make it, Donna Lourdes?" asked a young man who had reopened his small store thanks to Ivanna's support. "Or will everything just go back to the way it was?" "We have to believe, my son," the elderly woman replied, clutching her shawl against the cold. "They've come this far because they believed in something greater. And that's what will make the difference." Inside the community center, Ivanna and Hector stood face to face with ArqVision's executives, who leafed through updated reports and watched footage of the community events and the festival's results. The pressure was palpable, and Ivanna felt each heartbeat echoing in her ears. Walter was also present, attending the meeting as a representative of the businesspeople supporting his vision of a modernized Velmor. He watched everything with a critical eye, waiting for any opportunity to undermine Ivanna and Hector's presentation. He knew that if he could persuade ArqVision's executives to withdraw their support, He would have the space to push his own vision of a radical transformation for Baixa Aldora. "Thank you all for being here," Ivanna began, her voice echoing through the simple yet welcoming hall. "I know there are many doubts about Baixa Aldora's future, but today we want to show that the revitalization is not just a dream. It's a reality that is already changing lives and that can serve as a model for all of Velmor." Images of the festival and testimonials from residents played on the screen, alongside graphs showing the increase in visitor traffic and the positive social impact the project had generated. Hector, as always, focused on the numbers, presenting growth projections and demonstrating that, with the new support emerging after the festival, there was a viable path toward financial sustainability. The ArqVision executives kept their expressions neutral, absorbing each piece of information with a keen eye. Walter, however, interrupted the presentation, rising from his chair and pointing to the graphs. "You can show all the pretty pictures you want," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But the truth is, there are still no guarantees that this will be financially viable. The numbers Mr. Hector presents are promises, and we no longer have time to wait. Velmor needs growth now, not nostalgia for a past that no longer exists." Ivanna felt her blood boil at Walter's words, but she remained calm. She knew that this moment called for more than anger. It required conviction. "With all due respect, Walter, you're wrong," she said, looking directly at him. "Baixa Aldora is not about nostalgia. It's about valuing what we have while building something new. The numbers are promises, yes, but promises that we are already fulfilling. And what you call the past is what gives this neighborhood strength and identity. It's what makes people feel connected. That's what Velmor needs, a future that respects its roots." Silence filled the room as everyone absorbed Ivanna's words. Hector, standing beside her, felt a wave of quiet pride for his project partner. He had never imagined that the young architect who had once challenged him would become someone he respected so deeply. And for the first time, he decided to risk everything for something that wasn't just an investment, but a cause. "If you decide to withdraw funding, you'll miss the chance to see something unique grow here," Hector said, turning to the executives. "But if you continue with us, you'll be investing in something that could set an example for the entire country. A city that modernizes without forgetting who it is. I believe in Baixa Aldora, and I hope you can believe in it too." The ArqVision executives exchanged glances, and the leader of the group, who had kept a neutral expression until that moment, finally stood up. "What we saw here today truly impressed us," he began, looking directly at Ivanna and Hector. "We understand the risks and we know the challenges are significant. But we also recognize the positive impact you've created. ArqVision has decided to continue supporting the project, with stricter monitoring conditions, but we believe there is a future here that is worth exploring." The executive's words echoed through the room, and Ivanna could hardly believe what she was hearing. Hector let out a sigh of relief, and for a moment, it all felt like a dream. Walter clenched his fists in frustration but remained silent, knowing that this battle was lost, at least for now. Outside, the news spread quickly among the residents and supporters. Cheers, applause, and hugs filled Baixa Aldora's square, and when Ivanna stepped out of the community center, she was met with tears and smiles. Donna Lourdes embraced her, holding her hands tightly. "I knew you would make it, my dear," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You've brought us back to life." Ivanna returned the hug, feeling that she had finally fulfilled her promise. She looked at Hector, who was watching her with a tired but genuine smile, and felt a deep gratitude for having found an unlikely but essential ally. "Thank you for believing, Hector," she said sincerely. "I know it wasn't easy for you, but I think we've done something special together." "It was you who taught me to believe, Ivanna," Hector replied with a slight nod. "And I have to admit, it's one of the best decisions I've ever made." As the residents celebrated and the lights of Velmor shone in the distance, Ivanna and Hector knew there was still much work to be done. The revitalization of Baixa Aldora wasn't a project that ended there. It was a beginning, a new chapter in the story of a neighborhood that had refused to disappear. Walter, though defeated, continued to observe from a distance, aware that this clash had been just one part of a larger change in Velmor. But seeing the strength of the community and Ivanna's determination, he also realized that he would have to rethink his strategies, for he was up against something that couldn't be easily erased. And as night fell over Velmor, Baixa Aldora was reborn once more, with its lights, its stories, and its hopes, ready to show that in a world that changes so quickly, there is still a place for those who remember where they came from. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes and discover how this and other stories are connected here in Velmor. Leave a like and comment to let me know what you think.